This series is a sham. Each episode starts off with a blatantly dishonest premise and then immediately switches its position. Like most evolutionists, the host is resorting to trickery to get views. And to make matters worse, some of the things he says are blatant lies. These are some heavy accusations. I may as well investigate. Before exploring this sham of a series, I should announce that I'll be taking a hiatus from this show for about a month for some personal obligations that I need time for. In the meantime, Christy Winters will be posting a 2-part interview she conducted with me. I'll post a link in a reminder video when each part is up. When I come back, I'll be making some minor improvements to this series. When looking for the failures of this series, one doesn't need to look much further than the title sequence. As numerous people have pointed out, I have Noah bringing 2 male lions aboard the Ark. When creating the animation, I completely spaced the sexual dimorphism of lions. To make matters worse, I have Adam and Eve wearing leaves to cover themselves, but they haven't even eaten the fruit of the tree of knowledge yet. I actually did this intentionally because I wanted to avoid a flagging for sexual content. So already I've got scientific and biblical failures. But the biggest failure in the title sequence was pointed out by YouTube user Paul T. Shordell. Put simply, it's way too long. It's the length of a television title sequence. And wow, is it ever irritating when binge watching. When I come back in a month, that will be improved. As I explained in the first episode, examining the arguments as creationists present them led me to a greater understanding of science. I wasn't ever a creationist, but whenever they would stump me in a debate, I'd look up the science behind the argument and usually ended up reading primary source material showing the real science in detail. The details are what ultimately destroy creationism. But a user named Papa John opined that the title and narrative style are dishonest, which destroys my credibility and ultimately destroys any chance of a creationist ever learning anything. Of course, I have no intention of changing the title and format, but I do think it's a valid concern. I'd love to get anyone else's opinion on that in the comments. Another issue some people have had is that there are no sources cited in the descriptions for these videos. I initially thought that showing the paper in the video and naming the publication and publication date would be more than enough. However, I realized that checking references should never be difficult. So from now on, all of my episodes will contain my sources in the description box. I will have sources for past episodes in each of the previous episodes by the time I return. As for out and out errata, in episode 6, I neglected to explain that tidal friction accelerates the recession of the moon because, with all of the other factors, I assumed my case was made. It was also on this video where I had my first crazy commenter. Jason Kelty claimed that this episode was a straw man argument. I had stated that, according to creationists, at the moon's current rate of recession, it would be touching the Earth just 1 million years ago. I got the calculation from Kent Hovind in a debate from 1992, but Kelty was adamant that the correct estimate would be 1.4 billion years ago, so, to be fair, I annotated the video. Even using his calculated age, the creationist argument still fails, but that wasn't enough for him. He invited me to continue the discussion on his page where he could delete comments he doesn't like. Of course, I was overjoyed at being invited to the prospect of being censored. It was the day after I posted this episode that I noticed a sudden spike in my subscribers. After doing a little searching, I found that I'd been given a shout out by a channel I had recently subscribed to called Fish Head Salad. I owe a debt of gratitude for that. It really got the ball rolling, but a simple thank you will have to do for now. In episode 7, Polonium Halos, I mistakenly shortened the decay chain of uranium-238. I have it breaking down in one step to uranium-234, as Subduction Zone kindly pointed out. Uranium-238 emits an alpha particle and becomes thorium-234 before emitting 2 separate beta decays to become uranium-234. In episode 10, the Miller-Urey experiment, BYRTDO calls me a liar for claiming 19 of the amino acids needed for life were found in the Murchison meteorite. Because his source is the original paper published in Nature on January 2, 1970, he contends there were only 6 proteinogenic amino acids found in the meteorite. Since the meteorite's discovery, there have been many discoveries. According to Cronin and Chang in a July 2003 article in the journal Meteoritics and Planetary Science, the count is now up to 19. Soon after publishing this, I saw a second spike in subscribers. This episode had the distinction of being cited in a video by Messianic Manic. Again, for now, a thank you will have to do. Episode 11, The Conspiracy Against Kent Hovind, was a video I wasn't particularly proud of because it really contained no science. But to my surprise, it is my most popular video to date. As a result, it brought out the paranoid conspiracy theory nuts in full force. There are enough case studies and comments there to base a PhD study on. At about this time, a perfect storm of events occurred. Wildwood Claire, who had been watching for a few weeks, gave me a shout out on Coffee with Claire, and Thunderfoot had shared this episode. A sincere thank you to Wildwood Claire and Thunderfoot, two channels I've been subscribed to for years and two people whose opinions I deeply respect. In episode 12, The Crocoduck, Dutch Liam 84 was good enough to correct my pronunciation of Drosophila. How embarrassing. In episode 13, Darwin Recanted, I insinuated that Darwin was deeply religious when he graduated from Cambridge. Lance Wilson was good enough to correct me there. According to Sandra Herbert's Charles Darwin Geologist and Michael Ruse's Darwinian Revolution, Science Red in Tooth and Claw, Darwin was preparing to be a pastor, mostly to please his father, and because at the time, to teach at a British university, you had to be in the clergy. Many people have mentioned that Darwin's recanting, if it had occurred, was wholly irrelevant to the validity of evolution. I actually do discuss this fact in the extended version, available exclusively at Secular TV. At about this time, I had another sudden spike in subscribers. Unexpectedly, King Crocoduck gave me a shout out, and I certainly owe him a big thanks as well. In episode 16, The Geological Column, I mistakenly placed the debate between uniformitarianism and catastrophism in the time of James Hutton, but as Lance Wilson corrects me, both terms weren't even coined until 1832. My biggest and most embarrassing mistake comes in episode 17. I didn't even notice it until it was pointed out by Andreas Hagen and then Peter S. I confused nuclear fusion with nuclear fission as the mechanism behind the heat and light of the sun. Fission occurs when the atom splits, like an atomic bomb. Fusion is when two atoms are fused together, like in a solar furnace where two hydrogen atoms fuse to form a helium atom. This is what powers the sun. I would really love to shout out some upcoming channels, but I don't really feel I can do anyone much good yet. I think I need about double the subscribers to have any effect. But since I'm about to be on hiatus for about a month, I'd like to share some channels I love, but that have been on a long hiatus. Maybe a few new visitors can get them to start publishing again. The first is Dawn Exodus. He had some very insightful videos, but now he's silent. He had some great research and even destroyed the scientific descent from Darwinism.
Anyone who spent very much time dealing with creationists has seen this list before. This was published by the Discovery Institute and is a list of roughly 100 scientists who supposedly doubt evolution. This list has 101 signees and reads, "We are skeptical of claims for the ability of random mutation and natural selection to account for the complexity of life. Careful examination of the evidence for Darwinian theory should be encouraged." Now, the first thing which should jump out at you is the simple fact that this doesn't really mean that they reject evolution whatsoever. In fact, Michael Behe signed this list, and he has no problem whatsoever with common descent.
The second is CDK007. For his first few months, he was completely unknown, speaking only in text with pictures and containing complex science with inspiring simplicity. He soon became an authority, but mysteriously became silent again. Finally, one you should just watch from the beginning. Edward Current is a near-perfect emulation of religious zealotry. Every once in a while, he comes back for a single video and promptly disappears again. He was a brilliant satire.
Now, I'll be honest. For a while, we creationists have tried to dazzle godless evolutionists with big words like intelligent design and irreducible complexity. But it turns out, scientists actually like big words. And frankly, they just weren't impressed. I mean, even a conservative federal judge appointed by Bush ruled that intelligent design isn't science. So, I am hereby calling on my Christian brethren to bring back good old, God-fearing, biblical creation science. Only this time, let's do it right.
If there are still any creationists who still watch these episodes, I'm sure they took great joy in seeing me lower myself to admit my mistakes. But I look at it differently. As human beings, we all know we're all imperfect. In admitting mistakes, however embarrassing they might be, we demonstrate that however flawed we might be, dishonesty is not one of those flaws. The greatest scientists admit their flaws and reformulate their theories when needed. Most of the atheists and scientists that I most respect have errata videos, such as Aaron Ra and Potholer54. On the other hand, I have never seen a creationist errata video. I'm not saying they don't exist. I'm just saying I've never seen one. Ultimately, the truth is a horizon that we can never reach, but using the scientific method, we inch ever closer. And that's how creationism taught me real science.
Learn more about the real science behind other creationist arguments by watching other episodes. If there's a creationist argument you think I should investigate, please comment below. It may be the subject of a later video. In the meantime, subscribe and make sure you don't miss it.
One thing evolutionists won't discuss is the fact that the word evolution actually has 6 definitions. Number 1, cosmic evolution, the origin of time, space, and matter with the Big Bang. Number 2 is chemical evolution, the origin of higher elements beyond hydrogen and helium. Number 3 is stellar and planetary evolution, the origin of the stars and the planets. Number 4 is organic evolution, the origin of life from non-life. Number 5 is macroevolution, the changing from one kind of animal to another kind. And number 6, microevolution, variation within the kinds. Of those 6 definitions, only one of them, microevolution, has ever been observed. But that doesn't stop evolutionists from pretending they're all one thing. It's just part of their propaganda machine. I had to investigate. Cutting right to the chase, there is actually only one definition for the word evolution, and that is change over time. Any other definition is simply a context. One of those contexts is a theory that the observed morphological changes in organisms are due to changes in allele frequencies resulting from random mutation and natural selection. This is the theory first proposed by Charles Darwin in his often cited, rarely read work on the origin of species. In the years since the publication of this work, the mechanism of random mutation has been proven to manifest morphological changes which have been artificially selected by human beings. The theoretical part is that in nature, the propensity of some mutations to improve the overall fitness of an individual also gives it a reproductive advantage in whatever ecological niche it may occupy. This will probably never be proven, but we can make predictions based upon this assumption. The idea that all life on Earth is somehow related, albeit distantly, is known as the theory of common descent. In the modern synthesis of the theory of evolution, it is the previous mechanisms of random mutation and natural selection which have manifested these increasing chasms between species. This leads us to taxonomy. The first scientifically useful method of taxonomy was proposed by Carolus Linnaeus. In pursuit of the biblical kinds, Linnaeus examined countless species. Once he determined distinct species, he began to notice morphological similarities which unified species under various genera. He then noticed similarities in various genera and grouped them into orders, then classes, phyla, and even kingdoms. Each of these clades has been revised by the addition of subclades and superclades as the variety within them has become more and more apparent. In the end, the only truly observable clade was species, being any group which can genetically reproduce, excluding all others. This is where the concept of microevolution applies. On several occasions, however, 2 populations of the same species have been observed to drift far enough genetically from each other that they are no longer able to reproduce. This is what is known as speciation. Any genetic change from that point on is above the species level, which is what is scientifically known as macroevolution. Genetic evidence, being commonly used to establish relationship between individuals, can also be applied to different species. As a result, confirming the genetic relation of species has actually redefined some clades. While scientists try to adhere on some level to the Linnaean taxonomic clades, morphological similarities simply don't construct a complete picture, as, after all, these morphological details are merely the result of the genes that produce them. For example, due to morphological similarity, bats had always been considered to be close relatives of primates. Genetically, however, they are much more closely related to horses sources. For reasons like this, the Linnaean classification system is known to be incomplete, yet it is still used, albeit in a modified fashion, better representing the genetic rather than morphological evidence. Strangely, this really required few modifications. Assuming the theory of common descent, we can use the modified taxonomic system to predict where we should expect to find specific fossils. For example, Edward B. Deschler of the Academy of Natural Sciences, Neil H. Shubin from the University of Chicago, and Harvard University professor Farish A. Jenkins Jr. were able to predict ahead of time where they should expect to find a fossil of a creature which appeared to have wrist bones similar to tetrapods and yet rays similar to ray-finned fishes with spiracles in the head, which would be indicative of a lung system, in addition to a pectoral girdle separating the head from the body with a neck. They predicted that this morphological combination of tetrapod and fish-like traits would be found in Devonian strata on Ellesmere Island, Nunavut, in northern Canada, and after 5 years of excavation found no less than 3 individuals matching those exact traits. These individuals were named Tiktaalik. Now maybe the theory of common descent is wrong, but if it is, it's quite coincidental that it has repeatedly made these kinds of predictions both genetic and paleontological. One prediction not made by common descent is the changing of one kind into another. Actually, it's quite the opposite. The first animal cell is still a member of the eukaryote domain. When the first notochord appeared in a creature, it may have become the first chordate, but it was still an animal, and therefore a eukaryote. The first mammal never stopped being a chordate, nor did the first primate ever stop being a mammal. When a population of primates lost their tails and became increasingly sexually dimorphic, they may have gained the distinction of being apes, but they remained primates. When a population of great apes began to walk upright, we may recognize them as our hominid relatives, but they remain apes, just as we do to this day. This is the overall phenomenon of macroevolution. It bears no resemblance whatsoever to the creationist definition. To change clades would actually disprove the theory of common descent and would not be macroevolution at all. This is where the theory of evolution ends. It has nothing to do with the origin of life and makes no predictions about it. It doesn't even predict whether life formed before or after evolution began. In fact, every other application of evolution in the creationist argument is simply the assertion that things change over time. And, in fact, they do. The idea that non-living chemicals over time amalgamated into polymers which could reproduce, metabolize outside chemicals, and react to stimuli while developing some system of inheritance is called abiogenesis. It certainly qualifies as some sort of organic evolution, but the terms are far from synonymous. You'll note that abiogenesis is a hypothesis, not a theory. But like any other hypothesis, it makes a prediction. This prediction is that the constituent characteristics of life can appear naturally. As shown in episode 11, this prediction is confirmed by experiment as well as observation. When Louis Pasteur conducted his experiments, he was not addressing abiogenesis. He was refuting the idea of spontaneous generation of fully formed life. In the centuries since, scientists have observed that there is no distinct line between living and non-living material. There appears to be a gradient. There are even polymers for which scientists and even creationists are unable to decide whether or not they constitute life. For example, viruses and prions, both of which have some, but not all of the characteristics which define life as we know it, including evolving alleles. It is also an observable fact that planets and stars do change over time. We can call this evolution, but that doesn't mean we are adding a new definition to the word. The theories about stellar and planetary formation are direct consequences of Newton's laws as well as Einstein's general theory of relativity. Other than at the quantum level, these propositions are the concepts behind nearly everything you do today. These laws are responsible for the fact that you have a cell phone or a computer or can even access something like the internet. They have allowed humans to go into space and land on the moon. So applying these same equations in much simpler fashion to the coalescing of large amounts of hydrogen into stars is hardly a stretch of credibility. Nor is it a stretch of any of Newton's laws nor Einstein's laws to apply them to what happens at the center of stars. We actually apply these laws here on Earth and are also able to create heavier and heavier elements. So it appears that chemical evolution is not only observed but actually repeatable. But again, the definition of evolution continues to be change over time. The Big Bang would certainly be a change over a period of time, but to call this cosmic evolution would be unfairly vague, as even the creationist account from Genesis is a change in the universe over time, albeit over only 6 days. So the term applies equally to creationism and the Big Bang. The difference between the two, once again, is the predictions they make. Applying Newton's laws and Einstein's theory of relativity to the Big Bang, there should have been a point in time when the universe was impenetrable to radiation released by the energy
energy of the Big Bang. Ralph Alpher and Robert Herman published around 1950 that if the universe had since become transparent to this radiation, the Big Bang predicted that we should be able to detect a microwave background radiation originating from all directions. In the 1960s, Robert Dicke, Orno Penzias, and Robert Woodrow Wilson successfully discovered and measured this background radiation. Depending on the distance of the source, this radiation could be seen to have redshifted in accordance with predictions made by Edwin Hubble and originally Georges Lemaitre. In any case, there is only one definition for the word evolution. Although there are countless contexts for the word, there is only one scientifically accepted theory of evolution. Anytime the word is co-opted into a creationist argument in a context that is not a consequence of changing alleles, it is dishonestly conflating two separate ideas. As I said at the start of this series, I'm appropriating the word evolutionism to mean the scientific consensus. In doing so, I am both making up a word and misapplying it for the sake of being able to meet creationists on their own terms. Hopefully, common terminology will allow them to see how creationism taught me real science.
Learn more about the real science behind other creationist arguments by watching other episodes. If there's a creationist argument you think I should investigate, please comment below. It may be the subject of a later video. In the meantime, subscribe and make sure you don't miss it.